Once again, thank you all for being here tonight. On behalf of the college and on behalf of the ICC Foundation, we thank you for being here. My role with the college is with the foundation, and so we have generous donors that support things such as scholarships. Some of you in this room I know are on scholarships, but also we have donors who have endowments that allow us to do things like tonight, to bring in speakers, to have some goodies in the back, to put on cultural enrichment for the college. So we want to say thank you to the Carson Family Endowment here at ICC, the Carson family for their donations that help support this event and others like it. So I have the pleasure of introducing a few distinguished gentlemen in one row this evening. I didn't say which one, y'all get to decide later.
Oh, they know.
First off, on my far left, we have Dr. Christopher Stacy. Chris is a professor of history at Louisiana State University, Alexandria. He specializes in Southern history, cultural history, slavery in the Atlantic world, antebellum South, and the Civil War. Stacy's research interests include the history of professional wrestling and 1980s cultural history, and he's soon going to be moving on to do some work on jazz. His most recent book, published in 2023, is Populism and Professional Wrestling in the South, From Wrestling to Sports Entertainment. Thank you for being here, Chris. To his right, we have Dr. Charles Chuck Westmoreland. He is the interim chair for the School of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences and associate professor of history at Delta State University. He's also the coordinator of their Master of Arts and Liberal Studies program. His areas of expertise include the American South, post-1945 United States, religion in U.S. history, civil rights movement, and sports in U.S. history. He is currently working on 2 projects on sports in the South. Thank you for being here, Chuck. Next, we have our local star, Mr. Jeffrey Martin. He's a lifelong Mississippian and has been the library manager at the Itawamba County Pratt Memorial Library for 14 years. He lives here in Fulton with his wife, Sarah, and their 2 sons, Silas and Jude. His first book, Professional Wrestling in Mississippi, A History, I got it out of order here, was released by the History Press on June 5th, 2023. He has degrees from Itawamba Community College, the University of Mississippi, and most recently the University of Southern Mississippi, where he earned his Master of Library and Information Science degree. He also was chosen to be a panelist at the 2023 Mississippi Book Festival and was recently a part of the Mississippi Humanity Council Speakers Bureau. His interests include sports, pop culture, and history. He credits God for allowing him to be in remission from stage 4 cancer. And we're glad to have you. Last and never least, we have Dr. Toby Bates. Dr. Bates is an associate professor of history at Mississippi State University in Meridian. His areas of expertise include the 20th century United States, the Cold War, and Latin America. He has researched and published extensively on 20th century popular culture in the U.S. He has published The Reagan Rhetoric, History and Memory in the 1980s America, and has forthcoming works on Elvis Presley and General Benjamin Prentice. Toby grew up in Tupelo, and he was immersed in the world of Memphis area wrestling as it extended down in, and he's on a lot of YouTube videos. If you look and look for his mullet, you'll find him. So bad. Some of his honors include the 2021 Mississippi Humanities Council of the Year. Thank you for being with us, Toby.
Let me start.
You want to switch to your?
Yes. Let me turn this off. All right. When Mr. Upton called me and told me about this night and asked would I be willing to participate, he got about 4 words out. I'm like, yes, yes. Because again, it's, history is really the oldest profession. With apologies to anyone who wants to, stand up for prostitutes. Prostitution is not the oldest profession, all right? History is, because we're storytellers. We can talk about interpretive art all we want to and things such as that, right? But we really are storytellers. Where'd the clicker go? Right here? Okay. And how do I get to go next?
To the right.
The right, as it should be. All right, good. But no, we're storytellers. And really all of us are historians when you think about it. And what is so much fun is, and again, I'm really approaching this kind of as a fan, right? These guys have done the research, these guys have done the work, right? If you haven't purchased Dr. Stacy's book yet, buy one, buy two, in case you lose the first one, right? These guys know their onions. I'm approaching all this just as a fan. And I've dilly-dallied a little bit in it from time to time. But I really do appreciate the chance to be here. And this is what I saw every Saturday morning from 11 to 12:30. And it came out of Channel 5 out of Memphis. First out of Channel 13, then later Channel 5. Later they moved it to 10 o'clock in the morning from 10 to 11:30. But it was 90 minutes of professional wrestling. Not wrestling, wrestling, all right? We speak the King's English around here. Elvis or Jerry Lawler. Either one, I don't care, right? We speak the King's English, right? So, and what was great about this was, it permeated so much in the Southern culture. I love the fact that Dr. Stacy and others are doing work on this. If you walk into my office at MSU, you'll see a lot of artifacts. My wife calls it junk, artifacts. And they're action figures, not dolls, by the way, right? But this is a bust of Ronald Reagan, and I thought nothing better to put on Ronald Reagan than a mask I bought in Mexico. It has my football team on there, but this is what got me so much. I tend to talk a lot, and so I was talking to this person in Mexico who's wanting to sell me this mask. And he found out where I was from, and he goes, "Oh, you really need to have this mask. It's based on the model of the Invader." Okay? Now, folks, when you're talking about professional wrestling, especially the old territory days, and everything I talk about today is BC, okay? And I'll explain that in a few moments. There's always an invader, right? He's what's called a jobber. And you're going to hear a lot of language this evening based on carnival talk. So, because that's what professional wrestling used and actually kind of sprang from in many areas, not all areas. Well, a jobber was a guy that showed up, and in Memphis you got paid $25 to show up on live television to get beat up. And you put a mask on and you were the invader. And then later you might put another mask on, you might be someone else. Then you can come out without a mask. So you made $75 for getting beaten up 3 times, right? So I love the fact this guy in Mexico says to me, "Oh, it's based on the Invader out of Memphis." So here's this seller in Mexico selling me a mask made in Mexico, right? He says the style is based on a nobody wrestler out of Memphis, right? Wearing the colors and the emblem of an internationally known football team. Now, folks, I don't care if you're a historian or not. You got to unpack that, right? You got to play with that and figure out what that's all about. And just as you do with any pop culture, professional wrestling affected and reflected our society. It became our new mythology. And this is before Star Wars and Star Trek came back and Marvel took over, right? These guys were our mythology, right? Oh yes, I had to include this. This is our office manager, Miss Benson, and she put the mask on, right? And look, she put Batman. I love this. She put Batman on Ronald Reagan. So I work on Reagan. You think I'd have a his face showing at least, right? And everything, like I said, is BC. Now BC is before cartoonish. Now look, Memphis wrestling was real. That New York stuff was fake. Okay, right? And what's amazing, and it really is an incredible story, with what Vince McMahon did with his dad's empire. And he knew exactly, what nights to schedule things, Monday nights, that knocked Memphis out. But Memphis has really the glory of being the last territory to hang on. And in fact, they made several deals with the WWF, later WWE, that, to be kind of a developmental squad. You always had that in the territories, right? When I say territories, most major cities had wrestling, and that surrounding area was a territory. So Florida had their own wrestling, Alabama had their own wrestling, Mississippi had its own to the south. To the north of Mississippi was Memphis, as we talked about, right? And there were all these different territories. And this is really prior to cable. So sometimes it was a confusing thing if I went to Atlanta and I watched their wrestling, and I would see people in Atlanta doing something very different than they did in Memphis, right? And then I'd listen to Gordon Soley, and I'd say to myself, he's no Lance Russell, right? But it was amazing how you would figure this out, okay? So BC means before cartoons, right? And that's what I'm talking about. And I love the title card, right? Now, if you remember how this would come on, I never can say what it's called, 2001 something.
Yes,
Yeah, right. It's got a name like
Rustra or something.
Right. Turn around, jump down. Right. Okay. And I just love this. It's wrestling, right? And I always wondered what happened to this, and I was happy to see Jerry Jarrett, who's now passed away. He was interviewed by a guy out of Canada named Hannibal. And Hannibal does a lot of wrestling himself, Blood Seeker or something like that. But he interviews a lot of the old guys I grew up with. And when he interviewed Jerry Jarrett at his house in Tennessee, you could see behind was, what was there. So I'm really glad that survived. Nobody knows, by the way, what happened to the bell. Okay? The bell they used in the TV studio is gone. No one knows what happened to it. So again, wrestling, all right? And, the big guy there, of course, was Jerry Lawler. All right? I'm sorry, Jerry the King Lawler, right? Now, Jerry's whole thing is he's a very smart businessman. Okay? But this is the guy we grew up with. This was the guy that the bad guys or the heels, when they would come through Memphis, right, they would eventually wind up fighting Jerry. Okay? And Jerry became everyone's favorite. My favorite was Bill Dundee, right? And of course, Lawler called Dundee Dundee. He still calls him Dundee, right? So this is the Jerry Lawler I grew up with. And so I was kind of confused when he went to the WWE because he became something I didn't really recognize, right? Kiss the Foot match, Burger King, right? He looks scared. He looks, I don't know what he's looking there, right? Mike Penn's behind him, right? And so this was a very different person. And remember, we were seeing this on Monday. We were watching Jerry on television on Saturday. And then Monday, if he wasn't at the Coliseum where they had actually moved, which it might have had to move the wrestling in Memphis, he was, he was in Memphis. He was playing a very different person. And how he tried to explain this was, well, I'm going up there and taking their money. I'll play the buffoon to take that Yankee money. Now think about that quote, that Yankee money, right? He's touched on those cultural touchstones, right, of what? The Civil War, right? And I'm playing them for a fool, he says. Okay? And so Memphis was the last territory to really hang on. But this confused a lot of people, including me. And Bill Dundee is my guy. I was very confused when Bill Dundee, who was a good guy, bad guy in Memphis, he goes to WCW and he's Sir William, right? Bill Dundee, by the way, is not from Australia. He's from where? Scotland, very good. And he's like 81 years old now. And having some difficulties, actually. Okay. Yeah. So this was my guy growing up, right? And so these guys became, before Star Wars, before Star Trek Return, right before Marvel, these guys were our new mythology. Okay? And every week we would tune in to live television to find out about the story. And the whole world would stop. At one point, Memphis, Tennessee, Memphis Wrestling, live broadcasting, was picking up close to 60 to 70% of televisions that were turned on. Now, folks, this is just a handful of channels back then. Well, we had the 3 channels, and in PBS you had to watch if there was nothing else on, right? And so but it's Saturday. It's your first day out of school. It's your first day away from work, right? And you're going to spend it inside watching a wrestling program? Absolutely you are. Because you have to find out the next part of the story. And Memphis was very different also than the wrestling you see now, is there were no writers in Memphis, right? There were no character developers, all right? The booker would tell you basically what's going on. The booker would be the guy that, when you arrived at the TV studio, if it was Bill Dundee or a guy named Jerry Jarrett doing the booking, you knew already what was going to happen. Lawler would make up stuff at the very last minute. And he said, look, you guys are going to have a miner's glove on the pole match, right? Big, heavy work glove that I've never seen a miner wear. I never understand how the glove works, right? And it's on a pole. And whoever gets to it first gets to use it in the ring, right? So think about that. You're supposed to believe in a physical contest between 2 very large men, and whoever gets to this weapon can beat the crap out of the other one with it, and it will be legal, right? And people would tune in to find out who went up the pole, who took the miner's glove. It was our stories. My wife's father owned a small grocery store, and she could remember very much going in there on Saturday mornings, and all these grown men who could tie their shoes and do math and everything else were all gathered around this little black and white TV watching wrestling, right? And the thing about Memphis was, people asked me, did you know it was fake? We didn't like the word fake because these guys were putting their bodies to a lot of things. We knew it wasn't even scripted, really. We knew it wasn't real But then we give us every wrestling fan about what territory. Sorry, we'll talk about Santa Claus later. We knew it wasn't real per se, but we would. Every wrestling fan has this caveat where they would say, "Well, you know, sometimes they do get mad at each other. I mean, you miss a move, Lawler will pop you," which is true. He would. Dundee would give you a potato, which is a real punch, right?
Cooker beware.
That's right.
That video, Cooker beware.
Oh, beat that jobber up.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Thank God for YouTube, which I'll talk about in a second, right?
Receipts.
Yes, receipts. So these were stories that we, men and women, would tune into and watch. Because women were involved too, even if they weren't women wrestlers. Bill Dundee and Jerry Lawler, number 1 and number 2 in Memphis, they quite often went, at it, and then they tag team for a while and go back at it again. And Dundee at one time got so desperate to win Lawler's belt, he put his hair on the line, and he lost. So he cut his hair, right? Then he put his wife's hair on the line, and she lost. She also got $5,000. $5,000 in the late 1970s, that's a lot of money, okay? That's a lot of money. And we were glued to that TV to see what was going on. So, again, before the cartoons, and this has become so ingrained in Southern culture, right? Is that you would learn things about these wrestlers just through osmosis, just through watching the program, right? And Jim Croce has a song, "You Don't Mess Around with Jim." If you don't know this song, well, they're not Croce fans, but if you don't know this song, you're really missing something in culture. There's a great line in there, right? You don't tug on Superman's cape, you don't spit into the wind, right? You don't pull the mask off the old Lone Ranger, you don't mess around with Jim, right? It was, for my generation, it was like, you don't tug on Superman's cape, right? And as far as, you don't get Lawler's fury, right? You don't take the mask off the old Lone Ranger because he'll drop that strap in a hurry, right? And Lawler would always, most of the time, would wear this wrestling outfit that had tights here, and it was a one-piece, and it had one strap right here. And Lawler was a slow starter. I love how they would teach us this watching the matches, right? So you could knock Lawler around. Boy, if you did something dirty, he would drop that strap and beat the living crap out of 20 people. And the few times that he dropped the strap and went after somebody and it didn't have an effect, a hush fell over 8,000 people to this LLC. Okay? So I grew up in the world with, you don't mess around with Jim. It's like you don't mess around with Jerry, right? Because Jerry Lawler was the big guy, right? He was the king, so to speak. And whether it was the CWA in Memphis or other organizations, these were the two people that I look forward to seeing more than my mom and dad, all right? Lance Russell and Dave Brown, the weather clown, okay? Now Dave was and is a very respected meteorologist, award-winning, all that good stuff. But he would show up on Saturday mornings and do wrestling live. Lance had actually followed the wrestling company when they actually split off this parent organization. I'm not going to go into that and moved to Memphis. But Lance Russell, he was the storyteller. If you play Dungeons and Dragons, he was the dungeon master, right? He was the one walking you through it. And he had some great sayings. He nailed him if somebody landed a good punch, right? Or what a brawl, he'd say that. Or what in the Sam Hill. Or Jerry, we don't need that, right? Dave's words were very succinct, but because they were coming from a nationally recognized weatherman, right, they had a lot of weight to them. Don't do that. Let's go to a break. Enough of that stuff, right? And they would go to commercial and like, wow, Dave was really mad. He was really mad at them, right? It's hard to explain to you how powerful this program was. And again, all these other territories, they had their own wrestling shows, but quite often they were not live. And when you would go to studio wrestling, as I'm going to talk about in a second, you would sit on these, tickets were free because it was live on television. You would sit on these little blue benches, okay? And they would come out, and you'd sit there for 90 minutes and just be enthralled, right? And I was fortunate enough to do that several times, right? That's Lance, by the way, and Dave just a few years ago. Classic Memphis Wrestling is an outstanding site to go to if you're into any of this old territorial stuff, or your parents are, right? So these guys were the storytellers every Saturday, right? And these were our new mythology guys. Jerry Lawler, Dutch Mantel, Bill Dundee. There's dozens I could pick from. I'm trying to pick some that you might be familiar with, because they wrestled in Fulton a great deal. They wrestled in Tupelo most Friday nights. They were our heroes, though, and just like our heroes have these one-word labels, So did our heroes here. Jerry Lawler is the king. Dutch Mantell is known as Dirty Dutch. And Bill Dundee is what?
Superstar.
He's a superstar. Thank you. I have hope for America, right? Superstar, right? And just like mythology and our heroes, right? These guys had particular weapons. If things got really bad, they'd go to, right? You have to remember, if I walk up to a person 20 years old today and ask them, tell me the story of Icarus, they have no idea who Icarus is, right? But if I say, who's Peter Parker? They jump on, right? Well, that's how this was for us. Lawler's weapon was he could throw fire, right? Now, it's comical sometimes, because it takes a long time for that flashbang right to life, but he could throw fire, or he would drop the strap. Dutch Mantell had a whip named, good, Shoe Baby. Thank you, Kathy. Right? And Bill Dundee, any chain he could put around his fist, that was his weapon, right? So they had nicknames. They had particular weapons they would go to, right? Now, this is a particular interesting one. This is Mickey Poole. It's kind of hard to see. I borrowed it, stole it off YouTube. But this is Mickey Poole. He was Lawler's manager, and Lawler put his hair up in a match, and Lawler lost, right? So Mickey Poole got his head shaved. Does anyone recognize the date? August 15th, 1977. Most of the cops that are working at this Coliseum are about to be working for 48 to 72 hours, 96 hours straight. Why? That's right. Elvis died. Allegedly, right? Right? Now here's the fun thing. Mickey Poole was the president of the Elvis Presley fan club in Memphis. And he had been part of that club for a long time. He knew Elvis's dad. He'd seen Elvis a couple times, but he knew Vernon really well. And at this point, Muhammad Ali was the greatest, still is, right? And he was doing some gimmicky little things like with wrestlers and things like that. So Mickey Poole had this idea, what if we have Jerry the King Lawler fight, right? Karate Man, Elvis Presley. Now in August of 1977, before he died, of course, after he died, of course, obviously. But before he died, Elvis was not in the best shape. But they were trying to put this match together, right? Where one king of Memphis would challenge the other king, right? So with Ali, it was boxing versus wrestlers, or boxing versus football. Remember, he went up against Lyle Alzado, right? Ali did. Well, this was going to be...
He wrestled Antonio Inoki in 76.
It was a big thing. It was this crossover, and these guys were huge. These guys were huge stars, right? So this would have been karate versus Lawler, right? And so Vernon told Lawler, well, Jerry, Elvis is not in the best shape. He's about to go on tour. He always gets in better shape when he's on tour. So when he comes back, we'll talk about it. Well, unfortunately, like I said, just a few hours after this, Memphis turned into a crazy house because Presley passed away, right? So at times, your mythology crosses over and touches the real world. Now, this one also, the original Tupelo concession stand brawl in 1979. The building is still there. And this is where I used to go see wrestling a lot, was in Tupelo, at the Tupelo Sportatorium, which was actually, well, at one point it was a car maintenance place. They would just cover the old pits, right? And this was a match with Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee versus a couple of guys. One would become a moondog later, the other would become the honky tonk man. And they were going to fight, and Lawler and Dundee were going to lose, and then the fight was going to spill out into the concession stand. And it did. And they really did get angry at each other. And what's hilarious about this was the match ends, and then the camera turns back on, and Lance Russell says, we have a hell of a fight going on downstairs, right? And they get the camera there, and they're filming this fight, okay? And guys, this thing was mimicked so many times by other companies, and by the Memphis folks. But they were throwing mustard at each other. Get on YouTube sometimes. If you need to start, let some stuff out, watch them fight. Because it was a fight, okay? And they're slipping all over the mustard. What's funny, though, is if you know the story of this fight, right? Oh, I forgot about Tommy. Uncle Tommy was my dad's uncle. He liked the grape quite a bit. He had a comb over that would make Hitler jealous, right? Hitler had a big comb over, right? Tommy would jump in the ring with a knife. Dad's Uncle Tommy. So sometimes we went to wrestling to keep Uncle Tommy out of the ring, to keep him from being arrested. But he would get so mad at those bad guy wrestlers, right? The heels. He'd pull out this tiny little pocket knife and get in the ring and get pulling the hair out of his way, right? What's funny about this fight, though, if you notice when you get to inside the concession stand, it's kind of hard to see, right? But this is the popcorn machine. And his last name is Sheffield. I'm trying to remember his first name. Herman Sheffield, thank you very much. Again, great book, guys, great book, right? Herman Sheffield was like, okay, I'm okay with you guys doing this, because the promoter said, we'll pay for all the candy and everything. He said, but you cannot damage my popcorn machine. That's where I make all my money, right? It's like fireworks, right? Fireworks take about that much to make, and we sell them for this much, right? Big profit. So if you notice during this fight, Jerry Calhoun is standing here a lot in front of the machine, right? That's a brawl. I don't know what the referee's doing there. And then later when he gets too wrapped up, Herman gets in there, and he'll stand. It's all video, right? And it's funny to watch him protect this popcorn machine, you know, when you know that story. The WWE had a brawl like this for a concession stand, but they'd never shown a concession stand on TV before. The shelves were empty. The hot dog boxes were empty, right? It was like, hey, they did this back in '79. It was huge, right? Let's try it now. Again, fake wrestling. Do it.
I was right there where Calhoun is.
Is that right?
When they threw Lathan over and put him in the head.
Did it really? Have you ever washed your forehead since then? Yeah. But you know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, we were into this.
Sure.
And this got talked about all over town, made it up to Memphis, got talked about in the other cities where the Memphis territory would go. It was huge. It was absolutely huge, right? There are a lot of YouTube videos with me on them. I'm only showing you the date of one, because that's all I could find, wink wink. But in June of 1986, my friends and I, it's kind of hard to see, thank God, right? There's a better picture. This is me. This is me, right? About 8 of my friends drove up there. I had a friend whose dad, see how I call this, he handled the money for a guy named Plowboy Frazier. Now, Plowboy Frazier, he's one of the few people that looks like his name. Big old corn-fed redneck, all right? And nicest guy in the world. Couldn't handle his money very well. So David's dad handled his money. And Plowboy was what you really saw, and what they'll really talk about, right? What you really saw. Big old guy, right? He said, y'all come over and be my guest on wrestling. So we would go up, and we go to the front door, instead of where all the fans come in, we went to the front door. We would go in with Lance Russell, Dave Brown, right? We were standing there one time, and Abdul Gaddafi, the champion of Libya, right? He was there enjoying some Burger King, right? So we would go in, and it was absolutely amazing. Well, we thought, well, we want to get noticed, right? Because we all got our VCRs going on. So we're like, okay, let's cheer for the bad guys. And if the pretty wrestlers come out, like the Fabulous Ones, or the Fantastics, or Rock and Roll Express, let's all jump up and kiss them like the girls do. Right? Well, after we had cheered for the, I was a bad kid. After we cheered for the bad guys so much, when those teams came out, the police were pretty clear, you guys just sit right there, right? So, but watching this, there's Abdul Gaddafi right there. I said something to him he didn't like. I can't remember what it is. I can, but I'm not going to repeat it. He got very angry with me, right? But Abdul was, this is what made wrestling fun. During the Cold War, you'd have those evil what? Those evil Russian wrestlers, right? Right after World War II, you would have Tojo Yamamoto, very evil Japanese guy from Hawaii, right? So you had Abdul Gaddafi. And this was, this is what, June of '86. Well, remember, in March and April of '86, Reagan would get bored, right? He dropped a few bombs on Benghazi and Tripoli, right? So bad guys. So again, reflect and affect society. I said something to him. I don't remember what I said, but he didn't like it. That's him leaning over and talking to me, right? Now there's a big giant hillbilly coming in. That's me, right? My mouth's open. That's a shot, right? And then I'm right there again. And I've got a chin like Jay Leno, so you can maybe tell that's me right there. And it was just an absolute blast. One guy, his name was Jameson, he got thrown out of the ring and he reached into his sweatband and pulled out a razor blade. This is called getting color. And you get paid a little extra. And then when the bad guy picked him up, Lance Russell said, oh my God, it cut his head open, right? So when he cut his head with a razor blade, he cut himself. He started yelling, he cut himself. Cop would come over, y'all need to hush, right? Y'all need to be quiet, right? But it was really amazing to sit there and watch the whole crowd. More passion in these people, the small amount of people, than quite often you would see at one of these big shows. Memphis didn't have the pyrotechnics. Memphis didn't have the big ramp you walk down. They didn't have the intro music, for goodness sake. Occasionally they would play some, right? Because they really were one of the first territories to start doing music videos, right? And did they ask permission to use the music? You never know, right? But this crowd would be so hot and so popped watching this happen, this story, this next chapter of the story, that they would sell tickets. Somebody would look over and say, Ethel, we haven't been out in a while. You've been complaining right out. Let's go to wrestling Monday night. That's not what I meant, dear. Well, I'll take Jimmy then, right? I mean, really, they would sell tickets. This was their big push to sell the tickets, right? And so, I can't remember why I showed this. That's Buddy Landale. He has some issues with booger sugar. Anyway, oh yeah, the ropes. That's right, the ropes. We were there so early, I got to like touch the ring and everything. Big deal, guys. Touch a wrestling ring, right? The ring ropes were made of, basically they were garden hoses over wire. That's what they were. And occasionally the turnbuckles would break. Because remember, this would be put up on Saturday morning, take it down right after the show, and then transferred quite often to where they were wrestling next. So quite often the turnbuckles would break. And then somebody like Buddy Wayne would come out to fix it. Buddy Wayne was a bad guy in wrestling. Why would he come out and fix the turnbuckle? Well, because he worked for the company and it was his ring, right? It was kind of cool to see behind the scenes. And it didn't really affect our belief, right? We could soothe it by saying, you know, well, yeah, it's probably not real, but they get mad at each other, right? It was entertainment. And we were seeing a reflection of what was going on outside the window, you know, the world outside the window. We were seeing that reflected inside the ring, right? This is one of my favorite moments. Now, this was just from a few years ago. This incredible specimen right here is Grady Watson. Now, my wife and I got married in 1992. It's so tight, okay? We've been married, how long is that? 32 years, okay? I continued to watch wrestling after we were married. And one day she's walking through the living room and she goes, that's Grady Watson. Grady Watson is a gentleman from Walnut, Mississippi, okay? He's friends with Lawler. So they worked out a deal where he would be sitting in the crowd and the bad guy would grab him and beat him up. And that'd start this huge feud, right? Between the city of Walnut, Mississippi and Memphis Wrestling. All right? Well, I didn't realize he's still doing it, right? And he got into it just because he was friends with Lawler, right? And so you would sit there as a kid and you'd watch that, or even as an adult, and you go, that's weird, right? I see him every day of the week doing something else, but here he is fighting somebody twice his size. Suspended belief, right? So again, folks, just kind of wrapping up, there's some great websites. If you remember the old wrestling, right? Classic Memphis Wrestling is a great one. These are some other ones right here that are really good. There's a lot out there. There's a lot that's out there, okay? A lot of what I grew up watching is now on DVD, or it's now on digital, or 4K, even some of the old shows. There's a really good documentary called Memphis Heat, right? That's out. And it's really funny to watch these shows and see how they did the angle on some of these really oddball situations. Now, Dr. Stacy's going to talk about it a great deal, but Andy Kaufman, right? If you don't know who he is, he was a very big star in the early 1980s on one of the biggest television programs in the early 1980s. But he also liked to wrestle women. He was intergender?
Intergender.
Yeah, intergender.
Intergender champion, undefeated.
Undefeated, that's right. He would wrestle women. And if you beat me, I'll give you this much money, right? Or if you beat me, I'll marry you. And you'll be married to a big star. So he played this bad guy, this really obnoxious Hollywood star, right? And he tried to go to New York, and the McMahons were like, no. So he winds up going to Memphis, right? And he almost gets beat one night by a young lady, right? But you would sit there and watch that and go, yeah, I believe that. I believe that this star who likes to wrestle women, right, is not going to try to stick his nose into professional wrestling. Guys, it went all the way to David Letterman. And it ended in a big old slap, right? And it didn't end, it continued, I should say. Now, that may not sound like a big deal to you, but when there are only 3 channels, and a guy on a major television program, Taxi, is suddenly on your Memphis Wrestling, who's suddenly on David Letterman with Jerry Lawler, and those godful red pants. What was he thinking, right? That's extraordinary. Again, that shows that reflection, right? The reflect and effect of pop culture. So this breaks my heart, though, to see this. The legendary Memphis feud revamped and expanded. Jerry Lawler building the actors, right? They didn't have writers, guys. Professional wrestling now has writers, right? It has people who stage and tell you where to stand. They all look the same. There's no personal issues. Memphis Wrestling succeeded because Jerry Jarrett, who ran it, said personal issues make money. They make money. Personal issues are a big deal. So if a wrestler had kind of gone through a really messy divorce and had made it into the papers, right? Then one wrestler will say to another one, man, no, I can't be your tag team. No matter if your wife left you and slept with another guy, right? And people at home go, ooh, because they actually read about that, right? One of my favorites is the one wrestler who called the other wrestler's dad a drunk. And he goes, my dad's dead. He goes, well, I'm sorry he's dead, but he's a drunk, right? They would give you just enough stuff you were seeing in the news to make it seem like this all was legitimate, right? And again, it all started with that basic little title card. Now, in conclusion, right? I'm not sure that guy is on the right. He won't go away, but I'm not sure what it is, right? You've all seen this, I'm sure, right? Because you all were coming up at an age when all this actually was happening, where Donald Trump was involved in that fake New York wrestling, right? And I just think it's interesting because, there they are shaving the head of Vince McMahon. In Memphis, they would have an extension cord to the shaver, and the guy would then work on the head, right? Here we're actually doing it with lather, and we're taking our time. That's really nice. Donald's having a good time, right? Lawler actually ran for mayor of Memphis. Must have about 13, 14 years ago, 2009, something like that. Yeah. And how'd he do?
Not good.
I guess it depends. I back the king a little bit there, right?
He didn't win.
He didn't win, right? But he liked to point out that he was third, and he was the number one with the white candidates. That was a big deal to all. I'm like, Jerry, you don't need to say these things. You're not in a wrestling show right now, right? But he actually kicked around the idea of being mayor of Memphis, right? And recently, at a rally, he showed, of course, who he supported. Okay? So the point of all this is, and my little part of introducing this is, this actually had an impact. From a financial standpoint, it outlasted all the other territories. It was enough to challenge the big New York guys. But from a societal impact, right? My dad and I didn't watch a lot of TV shows together. We watched wrestling together, right? At 11 o'clock, 11 to 12:30, prime yard mowing time on Saturday, right? The whole world around here would stop to watch this. I'm not sure if we have anything like that right now. We might stop for a few seconds to watch something on Talktick, or what's it called?
Tic-tac.
TikTok, right? Is it TikTok? Okay. TikTok, okay. Right? So I appreciate you letting me just, for some of you out there, hopefully I touched a few memories for you, but these guys are the experts, okay? I was just a goofy guy sitting there watching it and getting mad if I taped it and somebody stopped the VCR, okay? I didn't know what happened with the story. So thank you so much for allowing me to talk about that just for a little bit. And I'm very excited about the research that's going on. And thank you, Michael, for having us all here. Thank you very much. Oh, two of these three of these gentlemen, they're, oh, by the way, is the young lady from the movies here? Captain America the other night? I went to see the Captain America movie on Saturday? Saturday, there was a whole family sitting next to us, and they were talking about coming here tonight, and they were worried about the weather. Now, you know, how that all started was talking about Captain America and some other thing, and they actually brought this up. So kudos to Michael and to Itawamba Community College and others. I mean, here's this family, of course, you know, I talked to folks. They're actually planning on coming here tonight, so they're probably here just a little shy. What you think? Charles Westmoreland, I've known, the one thing that was left out of his introduction was he's the nicest guy. He says good morning to you, and he really means it. That's disgusting, right? But a great deal about Charles is, again, it's sports, right? He's a Commanders fan, right? But looking good for the future.
Fine.
Charles.
30 years. 30 years.
What's that, Charles? Chuck. You're right. Chuck. Let me circle that. Chuck. Right?
That's his ring name.
But pro wrestling as a sport, it was considered a sport. I mean, these guys called themselves professional athletes. With other sports in the South or nationally, where does it fit in between the 60s and the 80s? What do we do with this?
Well, in a lot of places, wrestling was the big-time sport before major professional sports franchises came along. And this map up here is there's a lot going on here, folks, but it's really helpful to show how the territories were broken down along with some of the major stars.
That's cool.
Just to kind of give a little personal touch here, I did not grow up in Mississippi or near the Memphis area, so for me, my wrestling growing up was over here. If you look over to the right, you'll see Ric Flair. Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling Rocket Promotions out of Charlotte, North Carolina. I grew up in Virginia, and this was part of the Mid-Atlantic territory. So Virginia, the Carolinas, part of Georgia a little bit later on. And whereas Dr. Bates was talking about how Lance Russell and Dave Brown were the voices of authority, right? They were the straight guys. For me, it was a man named Bob Cottle, who is actually still living. He's about 95, 96 years old. I just saw on Facebook recently, he and his wife celebrated their 75th wedding anniversary. But Bob Cottle had made his name as a newscaster on WRAL, Raleigh, North Carolina television. He was also the communications director for a while for Senator Jesse Helms from North Carolina.
Oh my God.
That's another story. That's talk about unpacking something. But Bob Cottle was, he presented it like it was a sporting event. It was very serious, not a lot of goofiness, not Jerry Lawler making funny faces with WWF in the 1990s. But so it's in the 1960s and 1970s when pro sports starts coming into the South. The Braves come to Atlanta in 1966, same time as New Orleans Saints. And so we're starting to see, even in places like Memphis, you have briefly an ABA basketball team, the Pros, the TAMs, the Sounds. But professional wrestling was a mainstay in so many southern cities, large, medium size. And just thinking about Jerry Lawler, I was listening to a podcast interview with his son, Kevin. And Kevin talked about when Jerry Lawler finally won the AWA World Heavyweight Championship. It wasn't against Nick Bockwinkel, it was against Kurt Hennig, I think 1988. Kevin Lawler said that was like Memphis winning a pro sports championship because Lawler was so identified with the community. And so I think we've got some pictures, some newspaper clippings, Dusty Rhodes in Florida.
Oh, wow.
For me as a kid growing up watching Jim Crockett Promotions in the mid 1980s, my favorite wrestler was Dusty Rhodes. The American Dream, baby, right? But he first became a big star in Florida. And like a lot of wrestlers, he transitioned from being a heel, the villain, the bad guy, to a baby face, the good guy, the crowd favorite, the hero. And in Florida, he started off as a heel. He had actually been a heel when he was wrestling in other places up in Minnesota for the AWA. But kind of like you mentioned earlier about sort of the convergence of sports, entertainment, and politics, Dusty Rhodes was in a match one time. His tag team partner was a wrestler by the name of Pak Song Nam.
Okay.
This is 1974. Vietnam War, just kind of winding down. Pak Song Nam was actually Korean, but that didn't matter. But he was playing a character, kind of the evil Vietnamese character. And Dusty Rhodes had been this kind of nasty, roughneck Texan. And finally, Dusty Rhodes had had enough, and he turned babyface. He saw the good side of self, and he became the American Dream.
That was when he was wrestling with Dick Murdoch, right?
He had been with Dick Murdoch a little bit before as the Texas Outlaws.
Yeah.
That's right. But in Florida, he became this larger-than-life star. He did commercials, some of which you can find on YouTube for car dealerships. They're hilarious. And he also did a lot of outreach within the community.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the things that's really important about these territories is that, we think of sports figures as being national and global icons today. But within their regional territories, they were that. They were the icons. They were household names. And you see Dusty would go around speaking to high schools. The promoter of Florida wrestling, Eddie Graham, was a major philanthropist, donating to University of Tampa to start a wrestling program. He was very involved in kind of youth outreach with things like boys' homes. So these were prominent figures within these communities. You knew who they were even if you didn't watch wrestling every Saturday because it was covered heavily in the newspaper, and especially in the sports section. So I'll just reiterate one thing that Dr. Bates mentioned earlier. and it was also mentioned in the introduction about why are we here, why are we talking about wrestling. Wrestling is storytelling, and storytelling is essential to who we are as human beings. We need stories to carry on, to pass on from generation to generation. And so you mentioned Jerry Jarrett's sign that was, I believe it was in his office, that said personal issues make money, right? We're all attracted to personal issues. Luke and Anakin,
Yeah.
right? Tony Stark, right? Harry Potter, Voldemort, right? The struggle of good and evil, and quite often those lines get blurred. And I think you saw that a lot happening in the 1990s with the way professional wrestling was changing with, you know, the rise of an anti-hero like a Stone Cold Steve Austin or groups like the New World Order. And I'll just say this, and I'll pass it along to my colleagues. I thought the date of your video was pretty funny, June 14th, 1986. You can go to Peacock, June 17th, 1996, Monday Nitro, Richmond Coliseum. You will see me standing along the railway where the guys were coming down. And this is also kind of another example of how the Tupelo concession stand brawl got sort of morphed and modified over the years. But at that time, Ric Flair was feuding with the Macho Man Randy Savage, right? I don't know Macho Man, right? Sap into a Slim Jim. And so Flair had been coming down the previous weeks, and he would set up like a VIP table with hors d'oeuvres and a bottle of champagne, you know, not quite to the extent of the concession stand brawl. So you can see me on that Monday Nitro yelling and screaming as Ric Flair is being hit with a bottle of champagne or something. I don't know. So, but no, I think the compelling thing about wrestling is its storytelling and what it tells us about human conflict and mythology. So.
Yeah, and guys, you all do this every day, whether you realize it or not. If there's a particular program you watch, right? Or a reality show or a video game series you play, it's storytelling. And one of the examples I use is Walking Dead. When Glenn died, they lost 7 million viewers, you know, from the 1 week to the next. Okay? And people just completely you know, they knew he was going to die from the comic. But it practically killed the show. It's not real. But folks quit watching. They were upset at the storyline. And so I wanted to ask you real quick, though, if I can, just one quick follow-up. I'll just follow up in a minute, because I got to ask Dr. Stacy something. Why have I not gotten a free book? I mean, what I wanted to ask you was, the Memphis territory, all right, which I kind of started with, when Andy Kaufman comes in, I'm trying to think of a star today that would match that. Would it be like Schwimmer or Matt coming from the Friends or something? It was, because it showed a side of Andy that people didn't know that he actually, you know, wrestled women. And I wouldn't recall him a comedian. He's more like a performing artist. But can you talk a little bit about when Kaufman came into the wrestling industry, especially Memphis, that had always done some wild things? Just talk about that overall.
Yeah, thank you. This is just fan-damn-tastic, first of all. You've got my brain going 1,000 different ways. But I was going to point out, too, that how many modern wrestling fans are in here? Raise your hand.
You should be ashamed.
Modern wrestling fans. No. Don't be afraid. Raise your hand if you're a modern wrestling fan. You know, more power to you, right? A lot of the things that Memphis did, eventually New York did. And one of the things you mentioned was music, but also later on, New York was bringing in celebrities. Bringing in national celebrities was part of McMahon's business plan to launch the WWF as a national product. But Andy was unique. Andy was unique because he was a bona fide television star. I don't think he had broken into movies yet, but one of the things he did at Saturday Night Live, and I'm just going to, because we've got a lot of younger people in the audience, one of the things that Andy, I think, and I didn't put it in my book, but who's heard of the term trolling? Trolling? He was the original troll. I introduced my chapter with Andy. There's this skit, the Saturday Night Live skit, where a couple goes into the bathroom and smokes a joint, and it's sort of built upon that dynamic. Well, Andy goes off script and doesn't tell the producer. So they're really getting mad at each other. This is the kind of stuff Andy did. And Andy Kaufman was not an actor. He was not a comedian. He was a professional wrestler. And one of the stories, talking about stories that I tell in the book, is that Andy was a big-time wrestling fan in New York. And he wanted to break into the business. And through Lawler, okay, well, first of all, he approached Vince Sr. Vince Sr. said, we don't want that guy. We're the serious promotion. Okay, Jerry Lawler and Jerry Jarrett, yeah, we're bringing him in. Okay, but that whole program was Andy's preparation on Saturday Night Live. And it sort of taps into also a sectional zeitgeist, not just North and South, but North and South at a particular time. It's the post-civil rights era, okay? You have, furthermore, you're in the middle of second wave feminism. And one of the things, Andy built his character around a heel. And a heel's job is to make you hate him. And one of the things he did is he made fun of Southerners. If you go on YouTube, there's a couple of promos with him literally mocking Southerners, calling them dirty, calling them hillbillies, making fun of their accent. I love to do this in class, by the way. You know, when I say states' rights, I say states' rights.
That's right. That's right.
And there's one where he said, here's a bar of soap. Say it for me. Soap, not soap, soap. And he's making Memphis mad intentionally. But he's doing it through a bunch of prisms. He's doing it through this outside agitator. If you study the civil rights movement, lots of white Southerners didn't like outside agitators. So he was the outside agitator from Hollywood, from New York City. But the interesting dynamic here, which underscores the complexity of the storylines, if you listen to the Letterman segment, Lawler is the bad guy. He sort of morphs into the baby face because the New York crowd they know it's put on, or enough of them do. So I looked at that feud as a snapshot of the past and the future of professional wrestling within the context of not just Memphis, but the United States. So it was just such a fascinating. So who's never heard of Andy Kaufman? Look, don't be ashamed. Raise your hand.
That's good.
Put it in the YouTube machine. He was brilliant. He was funny. Go ahead.
Movie. I have to watch the movie.
Oh yeah.
It was
great.
Oh, a fun story about the movie with Jim Carrey.
Man on the Moon?
Man on the Moon.
Or Man in the Moon, really?
Man in the moon, or man on the moon. Man makes the moon. Man moons man.
That's right.
Man moons woman. Anyway, so Jim Carrey, of course, wants to just nail this part. So he's getting a little stiff and a little real. He's like slipping into immersion. Like he's not breaking character. And Jerry Lawler's like, what the hell's wrong with this guy? So there's a lot of sort of back scenes, backstories with the whole making of that movie based on, and that's the other thing I hope to impart too, is that when I was looking at organizing the book around chapters and a theme, believability, the suspension of disbelief or belief, whichever you want to call it. And it's too simplistic to say everybody believed, but enough. I think there's a quote from a Valentine. What's his
Johnny Valentine.
Yeah. If I can't make the audience believe in the wrestling, they're going to believe in me. Okay, so back in the territory days, before Vince McMahon ruined professional wrestling by exposing the business, yeah, I'm not a fan. Not a fan. It's a garbage, it's a crap product. They don't develop characters. There's too much gaga. Anyway, don't get me going. Okay? Look, all the respect, if you enjoy modern professional wrestling, that's you. That ain't me. It's just, I grew up with the stuff, but it was the believability. And every time, my most recent foray, this stuff is really good, is the NWA. The NWO angle with WCW was great. It was fantastic. And many commentators have said, or people who know the business and fans, when wrestling gets a little more real, that's when it gets interesting again. Anyway, that's...
Yeah.
So here's that move. By the way, this match, okay, culminating in the Letterman appearance, this match, Andy was the one who called the ambulance. And they didn't want to get it because that ambulances cost money. It was a gimmick in Memphis. So they did it. Okay, Andy's in a flea collar for a couple months. And Lawler and Kaufman are talking about the Letterman show. Okay, what's going to happen? So the plan was they're going to exchange barbs, but then they're going to kiss and make up and sing All the World Needs Is Love. That was going to be the final song on Letterman. Well, Lawler's like, you're going to, in wrestling they call it the blow-off match. Like, okay, if we're going to make up, this is done, right? You're going to end it. So Kaufman was like, well, what if you just hauled off and slapped me? And Kaufman was like, I don't think that's a good idea, but, So what you're watching on Letterman is completely off script.
That's right.
Even Lawler didn't know until he kind of decided, okay, this is the direction. That is the beauty of this style of wrestling rather than this scripted crap where these are actors, there's no improvisation, it's all crap. But anyway, it's the beauty, it's the preservation of, I guess it would be method acting?
Yeah.
So,
Immersion, yeah.
and anyway, so that chapter to me was, at least I had the most fun writing it. And I think a whole book could have come out of it just looking at Lawler and Kaufman.
Yeah.
And Andy was so good, just like Elvis, just like Jimi Hendrix, just like, so many others. Some people believe that he faked his death, but no, he did not. He succumbed to lung cancer in 1984, so.
Yeah, Andy, wouldn't Andy be booked at a comedy club and all these people would show up thinking they're going to get basically, Eddie Murphy or Chappelle, and Andy would sit on a bench or stool and read The Great Gatsby, the whole book, and then leave, and because he just wanted to push.
All along that Letterman did not know what was coming.
He did.
No,
that's true.
Blindsided him.
No, that's true. Letterman had no idea.
Because when music started, that was a show that was their second segment. They had a commercial, and Lawler was like, well, okay, this is going to stop here, and he did. He slapped the taste out of his mouth, and then he thought for a while, well, like Dr. Stacy said, Andy's not talking to me. Have I really screwed up? And then the phone rings. I think it was a phone call, and Andy was like, wasn't that great? But then he wore that collar, like you said, the match was in April. I think they were on Letterman in the summer, so he couldn't film Taxi, because he had the collar, or they had to work it in the show or whatever. I mean,
That's the other brilliant aspect to his career. Kaufman understood kayfabe. Kayfabe is just sort of, hey, professional wrestlers kept. And that's the other aspect of professional wrestling. I mean, you can look at it just from a pure labor, wrestlers and workers, and it's a business model. But professional wrestlers, most of them honored the code that we keep the trade secrets. Like, for example, in Mid-South, especially with Bill Watts, tightly run territory, you had to ride with heels. You couldn't be seen at a bar if you were heel with baby faces. You were to stay in character. In fact, if you were heel, better just not to go to public.
Well,
But,
also,
yeah, you would be
also,
fired.
if
I'm
you,
sorry,
if
go
you,
ahead.
were-
Yeah.
if you were a heel in Bill Watts' territory and you went to a bar and you got into a fight, and if you got your butt kicked,
Yeah.
you're gone. Because Bill Watts looked at the business, I am billing these people as the toughest guys around. Nobody can touch them and beat them. But if you go out and there's, some Joe Schmo out at the bar who starts talking trash and he whips you, then that
Yeah.
destroys the credibility.
Yeah, when Tupelo Wrestling went in on Friday night, if you went to Romy's, you see the good guys. I think Johnny's Drive-In, it changed some, but Romy's is a restaurant now that used to be a nice little convenience store.
Beer spot.
There you go. Yeah, the beer guy, the good guys will be there, and the heels will be at Johnny's. But you never saw them together, right? Or you'd be fired. And when your book came out, I bought it right away.
Thank
Okay,
you. I appreciate
I
that.
bought it from you were with me. We're down at what now? The Reed's,
Awesome.
and I immediately hollered at Dr. Stacy. I'm like, hey, you know this one? Because I knew what he was working on. And what I loved about your book, and if you could talk about this a little bit. I've kind of done it tonight without meaning to. We kind of make Mississippi just kind of be almost like the follower of all this. Part of this territory, part of this territory. But Mississippi had a fairly decent role in professional wrestling.
It did. First off, thank y'all for having me. I want to go into a little bit of my background. I was born in November 1986, so I missed most of the Memphis heyday. But that doesn't mean I don't know what was going on and all that. But when I was a kid, things weren't always perfect at home, but you could turn on wrestling and the good guy always won. You always could expect finality, and you slept well knowing that Hogan had defeated the really creepy and oddly gimmicked Dungeon of Doom. But being from South Philly, Mississippi, that's where I'm from originally. WCW came here a lot. Now, if you're a WWF fan here, can you imagine if the Elimination Chamber came to Tupelo? Or the Royal Rumble? Do you think that would happen today? No. Well, WCW the ratings were better than Raw is now. There's a bunch of different factors to look at, but 3 of their pay-per-views, which they did 12 a year approximately, came here to Tupelo, Mississippi. One of them, the first 2 are pretty much infamous. The 4th one's kind of a dud, or the 3rd one's kind of a dud. The first one was uncensored, which I wasn't at. It was their attempt to capitalize on ECW, which was this company that basically took that style that was created with that concession stand brawl, just went more extreme through Japan and blowing up, legitimately blowing crap up and that kind of thing. So WCW, this little company owned by Ted Turner, the same Ted Turner who owned, does he still own, he probably sold part to AOL and all that, but he might still sort of own the TBS and CNN and the Braves and all that. But they picked this up from ECW and they tried to do their own brand of extreme wrestling, which they had a karate match, they had a boxing match, they had a match that was supposed to be on the highway in the bed of a truck that they filmed 2 days before. And Dusty Rhodes' son, Dustin, was fired, as well as a guy named Barry Darso, who was known as a member of Demolition, the Blacktop Bully at the time. Dustin got fired from WCW, which was a huge deal because his dad was Dusty freaking Rhodes. I mean, so they had this big thing that corporate said you couldn't blade, which is that cutting yourself for color. And so Dustin went to the WWF and was really this first, what would I say his character was? Androgynous, maybe.
Gender bending.
It was gender bending.
Yeah.
He tried to, this was 1995, and nothing like this had ever been seen before, but I remember him pressing on the chest of his opponent, who was Scott Hall, Razor Ramon at the time. And it was just totally wrecking the whole culture that was of the time. It was record, it really was. It changed so much, really. But you had that, you had all sorts of things. Ric Flair, you had Hogan versus Vader in the main event, and Hogan ended up winning the main event, which was a strap match where you're supposed to drag your opponent to each of the 4 corners. He won that match by dragging Ric Flair, who was dressed in drag, to all 4 corners of the ring, which makes absolutely no sense. The next one I was at is one of my most fond memories as a child. It's known because there was this tri-level cage that was over the side that basically the two good guys in the company, I think Sting might have been hurt or something a little bit at that time, or no, he was in a random match before, but Hogan and Savage took on the Dungeon of Doom and Four Horsemen. They put these two guys against the whole entire company almost, and they went and defeated them in this convoluted match that made no sense, that nobody could see. And the legend about that is Hogan wasn't even sure if he was going to be able to go through it. Him shaking the cage and saying, "I don't know, brother."
Yeah.
Allegedly that happened. And another cool story I found out when I was writing my book is that allegedly that cage sat at the Tupelo Coliseum, Baycorp South Arena, Cadence Big Arena, whatever you want to call it now, for years and years and years, and eventually they threw it away.
Oh.
If somebody were to have taken that to their garage and chopped it into pieces, that would go for several $1,000s a piece right now. But yes, so that was my background in wrestling. But Mississippi, it had a huge role in wrestling. It really did. It kind of mirrors culturally. There's so many different regions of Mississippi. We're not all one. We're not like the people from the Delta exactly. That's not to say we're better or worse. We're just different. We're not like the people from the Pine Ridge, or the Pine Forest, or
Sure.
we're just
Coast.
different.
Yeah.
We're not like the people from the coast. We don't celebrate Mardi Gras. Though when I went to Southern Miss, it was nice to get out of school for
Sure.
Mardi Gras. But yeah, wrestling mimicked that. You had Memphis was basically, they would go down to about Philadelphia and upwards. That went with Memphis, which was the Welches and the Goulises and the Jarretts and eventually the Lawlers. Then you had the Coast, which started out as that same folks. Then they sold to their cousins, the Fields brothers, who were really big showmen. They owned a big race car track, and eventually that's how they got out of wrestling. They just started running the racing track all the time. And then you had the rest of Mississippi, which went to this old school guy who'd been wrestling since the 30s named George Colkin, or his brother's name was Jack Curtis, and he was a really big wrestler at the time, so he became George Curtis, his brother, actually his half-brother. George's son was the forward in my book, and I was just blessed to have him and his blessing in writing the book. But they basically were partners with Cowboy Bill Watts. And there was a difference. You said BC, before cartoons, there was different levels of cartoons because
You like the big guys.
Memphis,
Yeah.
Lawler, and Dundee, compared to the rest of the profession, were little guys. I mean, Dundee never really excelled anywhere else.
Sure.
Lawler, they made fun of him in WWE. That doesn't mean he was worse. It's just the way they portrayed him. But whereas WWE, they had the big muscular guys, and Bill Watts just had the guys that could beat the absolute crap out of you. They might not look like they could, but they had to. Because Watts was a...
Watts used Bill Dundee as a booker.
Yeah.
There
He
was
did?
there was a trade.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the Rock and Roll Express.
Yeah,
and,
it was. And I'm just wondering if it did you?
I touched on it briefly in
Gotcha.
there. Not too much. In all honesty, I had a word count that was very much limiting to what I could do with it, and also a time frame that was very unreasonable.
I hate those.
But you live, you learn. And my book's in Walgreens, and that's cool. So, in Tupelo, and maybe all over the state. Who knows? But that's the reason I published with them. But yeah, so compared to Memphis, or down south compared to Memphis, was probably more real in my opinion than Memphis. Memphis did more talking. They built up the story. They were legitimately beating the crap out of each other, or at least made it look like it. But Watts kept it more in the ring, and that's just the difference. Every area had its style, even though a lot of the guys came through the same
Right.
place, but they might wrestle a different style in a different place. And
You know how I used to fool myself when I was younger, and I would see a wrestler who'd come through Memphis, and if you're a big name, you eventually work your way up to Waller, and he'd win, and he would move on. I would see him in another territory. It'd be a very completely different style, and I'm like, oh, he had to change because Jerry embarrassed him so much. He had to change. That's what I would tell myself. You know, I wouldn't think that okay, different territory, and you know, and therefore he's playing this part. He's a good guy there. You know, the whole style change. I would just say that Lawler beat him so bad that when he was around other wrestlers, you know, he had to say, well, guys, you know, he beat me so bad, I had to rethink my life. You know.
but yeah, when I was probably in 8th grade, Vince McMahon bought WCW, which was so terrible to me. Although arguably, just as Andy Kaufman was the thing that made Memphis and wrestling in general rise to prominence, arguably celebrities are one of the things that brought it down as well. Because WCW started putting Jay Leno in matches, and Dennis Rodman,
RoboCop.
and yeah, RoboCop,
And it wasn't the original anyway.
yeah.
From
So
what I understand.
So it's multi-layered. Stars don't always equal money. So Vince bought the WCW, and he owned basically everything because ECW went out of business as well. And he had all these wrestlers theoretically that could be the best thing I'd ever seen. You could have have Sting versus The Undertaker. You could have Diamond Dallas Page and The Rock or whatnot. But that's not what we had because logistically, the big names sat at home and were able to draw lots of money for doing nothing. And the angle was pitiful. And I stopped watching wrestling for probably 10 years. Jim Cornette kind of got me into the feels with reliving the old days. And I decided, hey, one day, I'd always wanted to write a book. And a friend of mine wrote with the History Press. And I thought, well, if she can do it, I can do it. So, well, it's what it is. So I thought, well, what do I know? Well, I used to love wrestling, and I still love talking about it. So I started, talking to people on Facebook, and I just got this bevy of information, and I learned about so much stuff going on locally. I learned about Herman Sheffield and how there's a picture, yeah. I think this is probably ICC, honestly.
Outstanding.
I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, it says in Fulton.
It's in Fulton,
Cool.
but I don't know if it's ICC. That's generally where they wrestled at, though, at that time period. But I learned about, Aaron Holt and Sammy Holt, and I learned about Eugene's dad, Melvin. I learned about...
ICC Kentucky.
do what?
Oh, okay.
Illinois Community College,
okay.
yeah, like right here. And I don't know who the guys really are there. They're some folks that were going through there. But I learned about Jerry Perry, and I learned about Roy Justice, and I learned about the Tupelo Kid. All these folks that had regular jobs around them, but they were working for the Welches and the Goulises, and it was just so much more than I ever thought of. And then my book came out, and I was kind of like, well, this is kind of cool. But I was in Morton, Mississippi on a Saturday night in Morton High School, and there was probably 350 people there. And when the guy claimed to be the son of Junkyard Dog came out, everybody was just on his side, whether you were white, whether you were black, whether you were poor, whether you were rich, whether you were a lawyer, or whether you worked at the chicken plant. You were in there cheering the son of the Junkyard Dog. And it was just this unifying moment that kind of made me realize, yes, this is why I love this. It's not about whatever's going on in the WWE right now and Netflix and all that, but it's about bringing people together.
Yeah, it's funny, guys. Hopefully, one thing you're getting from this is that for those in here who hate history, you do not hate history. You hate the way it was taught to you. I'm telling you, right? Because what we've encountered with our students is students will, have a hard time coming up with an idea for a paper or a syllabus project or what have you. And I'll ask them, what are you into? Well, I like video games. Okay? Well, if it's a Revolutionary America class, I'll say, Why don't you look into why there's no Revolutionary American video games, or only a handful, right? Or the film side of it. But you have to get into Hollywood's first commitment. Is it revenue or realism, right? And then we talk about, why do those games, like Civil War games, why do they not sell? Because it takes 30 minutes to load the daggone gun, right? But the things you're interested in, you'd be amazed at the impact a lot of those elements have on society. And who better than you to tell the story? That's why I love your testimony on the book, And we run into the same thing with editors. We'll go to editors and we'll say, I have an idea for the book, and they'll go, what? You'll tell them, we go, what? Right? And, and we've all run into that. But we all have something to say. And we're all of us are storytellers. So one thing you've got in front of you tonight is, the fact that, we watch this stuff, we got into it, we obviously still research it, right? But you mentioned race. That was a big part also, professional race. We didn't touch on it.
Speaking of race, if you're studying, how many history majors in here? Raise your hand.
God bless you all.
Raise your hand. Civil rights movement. 2 events that I talk about in my book. One happened in 1959, was Sputnik Monroe was arrested for consorting with his fans in African American bars on Beale Street. And it was sort of a flashpoint of the many conflicts of the civil rights movement. And if you look at the history of professional wrestling, it sort of mimics other organized sports, regardless if you're talking about basketball or football, is there's an integration struggle, right? The other one that I found just utterly fascinating was in 1965, the AFL and NFL, right before the merger, had its All-Star game in New Orleans. It was scheduled for 1965, and a lot of the African-American athletes were not treated in New Orleans very well. And one of those fellas was a man by the name of Ernie Ladd.
Wow.
6'7", from Rayne, Louisiana, African-American wrestler who wouldn't put up with bullcrap. So he organized basically what became a successful boycott of moving they got the AFL to move the All-Star game to Houston, Texas. So again, this wrestling history is cultural history, and it's American history. You just got to dig enough to find all the stuff. Look, the stories, the storylines, the gimmicks, the wrestling, the drama. There's real people and real stories that connect to American history writ large, and Southern history.
I'll also mention with that, the New Orleans business community, in response to that, basically got its act together with the local businesses.
Correct.
Because they were wanting to get an NFL franchise. And if the businesses had not committed to desegregating and treating black patrons the same way they would white patrons, the Saints wouldn't have been there in 1966. Maybe it would have come later, but the business community knew that incidents like that brought embarrassment to the city on a national stage. One thing I want to mention, you mentioned Netflix and kind of thinking about how wrestling is consumed today versus back then, because you've got Monday Night Raw on Netflix now. You've got AEW has several shows a week. I mean, it's really very heavily inundated with wrestling, and plus independent promotions. You can watch matches on YouTube from all over the world. But wrestling today, I would say, at least at the larger professional corporate level, is really a television production. Back when we were growing up, the televised shows were effectively infomercials, because the way these companies made their money was by selling tickets on Monday night at the Mid-South Coliseum, Friday night at the Richmond Coliseum, where I would occasionally go to some matches. That's where you made the money.
In my time, it was moving away from that, but it was moving to pay-per-view, which was the idea that you get people to put $30, which was a lot of money then, still is to me, for just a TV product, one TV product for 3 hours. If you get 1 million buys, that's what, $30 million. I mean,
By the way, do y'all think wrestlers are employees?
Yes. Contract.
Yes, I'm
No,
No.
they're independent contractors.
Which has its good and bad side. Yeah.
You know, 4 o'clock drive, 200 miles, rather than we pay $15, make it work 7 o'clock next morning.
Health insurance,
Yeah.
use.
No protection.
Following Dr. Stacy's example, do any of you guys have any questions at all? Are you wondering who Flex Cavana is? You know who that is? Who is Flex Cavana, by the way?
The Rock.
The Rock when he was
Oh, wow.
in Memphis. Right.
What, 94,
Yeah.
95?
And The Undertaker, huge star, was very original, like Master of Pain, right? But seriously, do you guys have any questions at all about anything? Yes, sir.
I've heard y'all mention a lot of folks from the 60s and the 50s. I think you even made a reference to somebody who was wrestling in the 30s. But in this style that y'all are passionate about for wrestling, where does that style, like when does it start? Is it the 30s? Is it in the 19th century? Or what would be the beginning point for y'all for this style?
I would say the 19th century.